Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the program. Today we're going to discuss the world's first horse riders found near the Black Sea, buried inside their burial mounds known as kurgans, as well as going over some of the earliest evidence of horse riding through the studying of remains of skeletons found in burial mounds belonging to the Yamnaya culture, around 5,000 years old. And one find even suggests a date of around 6,300 years old, which in the article makes it kind of conservative. It really does seem very likely that it is indeed 6,300 years old. And the way they went about proving horse riding in this population of people is rather interesting. Normally, they would be buried with horses or some sort of items that would have like a horse engraving on it or things of that nature. Instead, what they did was examine the skeletons and looked for symptoms of certain wear and tear in the bones that was indicative of horsemanship, which they diagnosed as Horsemanship Syndrome, which is a conglomeration of several symptoms. So let's just take a quick look at the Yamnaya culture. So the Yamnaya culture migrated from the Pontic Caspian steppe to Romania and Bulgaria, and even as far as Hungary and Serbia. So these regions west of the Black Sea constitute a contact zone where mobile groups of herdsmen from the Yamnaya culture first encountered the long-established farmer communities of the late Neolithic and Chalcolithic traditions. So these pastoralists came and met with these farming communities in southeastern Europe. And for decades, the early Bronze Age expansion of these steppe people was usually assumed to be some sort of violent takeover, a violent invasion. In this study, they have said that they haven't found anything that indicates violence in the way that it was described before by other scholars. That doesn't necessarily mean that either side is wrong. This is just the observation that they saw. The Yamnaya culture were sheep herders as well as cattle herders, but now on top of that, they were mobile because they were on horseback. They had a population that developed in the Pontic Caspian steppes at the end of the 4th millennium BC, around there, or they had adopted wheel and wagon tech, which enhanced their mobility further, their range, their exploitation of vast quantities of resources. And then logically it follows that probably a big reason why they were able to spread their culture and their language, the Proto-Indo-European language, as far as they did, largely because of their mastery of horses. So this group that developed again in the Pontic Caspian steppes adopted this pastoralist way of life and as the, quote, first true nomads in the world. And within 200 years, like I said, they covered more than 5,000 kilometers between Hungary all the way to Western China, the Afanasivo culture. One thing that Volker Hyde, who's a professor of archaeology at the University of Helsinki, and he was one of the main members of this team, he says, quote, horseback riding seems to have evolved not long after the presumed domestication of horses in the Western Eurasian steppes. It was already rather common in members of the Yamnaya culture between 3000 and 2500 BC. So he's basically saying that as soon as the horse was domesticated, the horseback riding just, evolved not long after, which is, that's a long way of putting it. So I would argue that horseback riding was the reason, that was the goal of domesticating the horse. But either way, very interesting nonetheless. Horse riding is a pivotal moment in human history. The use of animals for transport, in particular the horse, provided considerable gain in mobility and distance that had profound effects on land use, trade, and warfare. So the scientists sought to look for traces of horsemanship that could be found in the skeletons. They studied over 217 skeletons from 39 sites, of which about 150 found in the kurgans belonged to the Yamnayans. So what they did was they used a set of 6 diagnostic criteria established as indicators of riding activity, quote, horsemanship syndrome. So 1, muscle attachment sites on the pelvis and thigh bone. 2, changes in the normally round shape of the hip sockets. 3, imprint marks caused by pressure of the rim on the neck of the femur, the diameter and form of the femur shaft. 5, vertebral degeneration caused by repeated vertical impact. So, yeah, obviously bouncing up and down on a horse would do that to you. And finally, number 6, trauma that typically can be caused by falls, kicks, or bites from horses as well. So these skeletons had these types of injuries. So what they found was altogether out of the 156 adult individuals, at least 24 or 15.4% can be classified as possible riders, while 5 Yamnaya and 2 later and possibly 2 earlier individuals qualify as highly probable riders. And then the one burial that I mentioned earlier that could be a lot older than the rest was dated to about 4300 BC in Hungary and had long been suspected to have been an immigrant from the steppes. And this research kind of bore it out because it showed 4 of the 6 riding pathologies, which, indicates riding 1,000 years even earlier than the Yamnaya. So again, this is further supported by Neolithic cemeteries of the same era of the steppes, found instances of horse remains placed in human graves, as well as other items that I mentioned earlier, stone maces carved in the shape of horse heads and such. And now they're gonna apply this method to other collections of skeletons in these huge cemeteries, like the corded ware culture, the bell beaker culture. All these different cultures had these huge cemeteries that contain many skeletons, and so they're gonna start re-examining these skeletons to see exactly how important horseback or horse mastery, rather, horse riding was to their culture. So anyway, let me know what you guys think about this. I thought this is a very interesting article. There's a lot going on in terms of archaeology in this area. So it's always good to stay posted because this stuff moves a mile a minute sometimes. So again, let me know what you guys think. Because for the longest time, they thought the Yamnaya were just, it didn't really occur to them. Well, for the longest time, the Yamnaya were thought to have just been herders, and that's pretty much the long and short of it. But it had been hypothesized here and there were a few papers written about the possibility of horseback mastery in order to kind of reconcile what they were able to do, which is spread their culture and their language in an unprecedented range in a relatively short amount of time. So anyway, let me know what you guys think about this. And I'll also, if you guys haven't checked yet, the Grimerica interview dropped. I thought it was pretty interesting. It was a pretty fun interview. It was always fun to talk to those guys. So check out my post or just type in Grimerica Jindo and it should come up.